I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk today and share with you some of the things that I've been working on. I have a lot to cover in a short period of time, so let's just get into it. First, a brief overview on me. I worked for 25 years in the games industry, first as an artist and then eventually as a director. A couple of highlights. I am one of the co-creators of NBA Street and Def Jam Vendetta and Def Jam Fight for New York for EA. I was also the art and creative director for Farmville 2 at Zynga, and I'm also a founder with 2 exits. In 2004, I co-founded Propaganda Games, which was acquired by Disney, where I stayed on for several years as a director of art. And in 2016, Midwinter Entertainment, which was eventually acquired by Improbable Worlds. If you are also a founder, then you know that is a difficult life that takes a lot of commitment and energy. And so after Midwinter, I took a break from the games business. Thankfully, the acquisitions allowed me freedom to rejuvenate, and I am grateful for that. For the past few years, I've practiced oil painting and I've further developed my coding skills. I went quite deep into algorithmic design with processing. Now I'm studying to become a creative technologist and have been deep diving into generative AI in the context of image making. These are some of the images that I've made using a hybrid of traditional CG techniques and AI. Even though I'm a practiced art director, I believe that it is important to draw a very distinct line between image making and art. Not all image making is art, not all photography is art, not all image, like I said, not all image making is art. So my goal today is to help expand the way that you look at the process of image making using AI as a complementary tool to your own vision. One big question on a lot of people's minds right now is CG dead? And the short answer should be an obvious no. Today, if you want a job making production quality images for advertising, visual effects, animation, or games, hopefully you've learned that you still need a strong foundation in CG. However, I do think that it's important for us to acknowledge and accept the reality that the way that we make images is changing. And I would say that traditional CG is not dead, but we are entering a state of decline. And so my advice to anyone working in or studying CG right now is to ignore AI at your peril. If I think about my own career and look back at some of the other techno-capitalist attack vectors that have threatened the way that we make images. My first industry job was in the 90s, right as 3D graphics were starting to displace 2D animators. And we tend to forget that that was a devastating transition for a lot of artists at that time. And it happened again when motion capture began to threaten classical animation, and again with art outsourcing. And today we find ourselves amidst of another cycle with the decline of raster graphics and the rise of neural graphics. I don't think anyone will disagree with me that computer graphics is in a creative destruction cycle right now. Industry-wide, it feels to me like we're right about here. Neural graphics has actually been around for many years, but only now are we really starting to see it make its way into more and more products through the adoption of generative AI. We're seeing more companies push forward into it. We're seeing some pull back. We're seeing many of them make fumbles, and we're learning vicariously through their mistakes. If I peek around the corner, as the current product cycles come to an end, I believe we will see even more dismantling of traditional CG institutions and more retooling in the direction of generative AI. One opportunity that I see right now is the concept of a hybrid working method, and this is where I've been focusing most of my time and attention, which is applying generative AI to augment traditional CG. I'm personally convinced that over the coming months and years, we will see this continued decline in raster graphics as it makes way for the rise in neural graphics. And I believe this to be especially true if we look at the next generation of consumer hardware, which has a lot of this stuff baked into it. The rest of this talk is going to be about getting more artistic control out of your AI image generations so that we don't continue to add slop to the slop. I will warn you that it does get a bit technical, and I move through a lot of these concepts really quickly. It's okay if you find it hard to follow. For now, I'd ask you to just focus on the examples, and if anything inspires you, then I invite you to refer back to this deck. I assume that you already have a basic familiarity with text to image, but you don't need a black belt in Python or a degree in data science to follow along with what I'm about to present. Anyone that's a visual thinker, has access to the right hardware, and a curious mind can do any of what I'm going to show you today. This is a roundup of some of the tools on the market that you might be familiar with. You've likely already used Midjourney. It's very powerful. It's still best in class for aesthetic quality. The downside is that the ability to control your images is quite limited, so it feels like playing a beautiful slot machine, which in my opinion limits its use to that of a brainstorming tool or a mood board generator, prototyping at best, but I do not recommend it for production. Adobe does have some interesting tools. Many of you are probably using generative fill in Photoshop for touch-up and canvas extension in particular. I'm of the opinion that the generator itself produces mixed results. It does have the ability to use style and composition reference images, which can be useful, especially in Firefly. Today, generally for most things, Stable Diffusion is the only solution available on market that's capable of both production quality and fine-grained control. Specifically, I recommend Comfy UI. I'm not paid by Comfy UI. I'm not endorsed. I'm not an influencer. But Comfy is a powerful node-based interface for Stable Diffusion that runs in browser, and it allows you to dial in all the parameters and control how you want the elements of an image to appear with precision. It's also open source, it runs locally, it's API friendly, and it's suitable for high volume automation. Focus is also worth calling out. It's Focus with 3 O's. Some people say Focus. I'm not going to say that. It's also a web interface for Stable Diffusion. If you like Midjourney, but you need more control, and you're looking to make the jump into Stable Diffusion, but you're intimidated by Comfy or you're intimidated by Automatic 1111, then I recommend checking out Focus, especially the in-painting tools. I have used Focus in production on a campaign, and it was quite helpful. I've only done experimental work with Cascade and Stable Diffusion 3. Right now, they have limited community support. Personally, I believe Stable Cascade is very underrated, and I believe that Stable Diffusion 3 has potential if it was more widely embraced by the community and if it's able to work through some of its issues. But for now, I wouldn't recommend either of them for production until more tools and models are available. If you have your own workstation and GPU, you can download Comfy UI from GitHub and get started in minutes. The link is there if you are interested. If you don't have access to a workstation, you can still use Comfy UI through a hosted cloud provider. There are many. Personally, I recommend runpod.io. I'm not going to cover installation today. There are plenty of tutorials on YouTube available for that, and it would take longer than we've got. You will also need to install the manager, which allows you to add custom nodes and models. You can also find that on GitHub. The link is there, or you can Google it or talk to me afterwards if you're interested. Once you're up and running, this is what a minimal 6-node setup for SDXL looks like. There's a checkpoint loader, positive and negative prompt, empty latent 1K sampler, and a decoder. This is the checkpoint loader. Here you can use the base checkpoint or download a custom one. Stable Diffusion has hundreds of custom checkpoints that have been trained by the development community that are available to use. But I always try to warn people about downloading public models. It is the Wild West out there, so here's a few things that you should know. First, when you're working with characters, you have to be aware that many of the models that you'll download, many of the models checkpoints that you pull down, they will be over-indexed with not safe for work content, which can be especially problematic, especially in corporate settings. And second, many of the models are trained and overfitted on copyrighted material, and so they're capable of generating outputs that may unintentionally produce more copyright violations than a properly trained foundational model would. We saw that example with Suno earlier and Jason Derulo. It's the same thing out there when it comes to image generation as well. And whether you intend to or not, you are still responsible for any copyright violations as a result of what you generate. And third, checkpoints typically come with an attached license that spells out the commercial terms. Some are restricted, some are unclear. Either way, you want to clearly understand these terms. And again, in any corporate setting, you don't want to violate any company policies. In fact, a lot of companies that I've been working with still don't even have generative AI policies yet. For myself, I'm not trying to hide the fact that I'm embracing generative AI and using it in my work. Before engaging in any client work, I've written my own disclosures that spell out the models that I use and exactly how I use them. I've tested and collected a lot of different public checkpoints. For reference, this is the same prompt and seed that's run through 8 of the most popular ones. Every checkpoint has its own unique style, ranging from photorealistic to hyperrealistic to even cartoon. These images are all rendered at 1024 by 1024, which is the native resolution of SDXL. Every architecture has a set of recommended resolutions. Here are the viable aspect ratios for SDXL. I believe there's also a helper node that you can download that puts these in a drop-down to make this easier if you don't want to be typing in numbers all the time. Keep in mind, those are all quite low resolution, and it only really works for thumbnail quality on web. So for any product or campaign work, you're going to need to generate higher resolution images than what the models were trained at. If you have the VRAM, you can technically just crank up the numbers to whatever you want here, and you can take this and increase the resolution to say 2K or 4K, and if you do that, you might have a bad day. You probably don't want a head sticking out of another head or an 8-wheeled Porsche 911, or maybe you do. I kind of like these images. I've been calling this AI-ness, and I'm starting to lean into it more and embrace it. But regardless, there are better ways to achieve high res for production quality. It typically involves starting with native resolution, taking your images through a progressive pipeline of enhancing and upscaling steps. The most basic technique for upscaling is known as the high-res fix. It involves generating a base image at native resolution, in this case 1K, and then upscaling its latent. In this case, we double the resolution to 2K, and then pass that through a second K sampler, which denoises it into a higher resolution image. And when you pass one image sampler into another, you're now effectively performing an image-to-image operation. If you look carefully, you can see that these images are not identical. The process hallucinates new details where they didn't previously exist. And this may or may not be problematic for you. There are a lot of different techniques to better control this, and I cover some of them throughout the rest of this talk. But this general process of passing your images through multiple steps in a pipeline is an important concept, and it's dialing in that process and building these types of workflows that will get you closer to production quality. For now, I want to take a step back to prompting. If you're not familiar with built-in styles, I recommend checking them out. This is the SDXL prompt styler node, and what this does is actually expand your prompt. So for example, my initial base prompt over on the left is just a few words, but after you select a style, it adds additional words to create longer and more descriptive prompts. So here, for example, I'm adding the SAI photographic style, and it's adding the words cinematic photo, 35mm photograph, film, bokeh, etc. And then in the negative prompt, it's adding in a bunch of non-photography terms like drawing, painting, crayon, sketch, etc. And now we have more descriptive tokens to work from. And this is what it looks like when it's wired up in Comfy UI. The raw text nodes go into the styler. Style is chosen by the dropdown, and the augmented text nodes come out and they get fed into the encoders. There are dozens of built-in styles out of the box, and you can access them from the dropdown in this node. You can also get under the hood, write your own custom styles very easily. It's just words that you're adding to your prompts. Here's some sample output from some of these styles. This is especially useful if you need to produce a large volume of images in a single consistent style. It's a little bit similar to the SREF codes in Midjourney if you're familiar with that, but it has more user-friendly, human-friendly labels. One trick that you can do with this is a simple style transfer, and you can also do a style blend by running a first pass with one style and finishing with another. Here's two checkpoints. The first sampler uses the Impressionist style. The second sampler uses a photographic style. I use a fixed seed, and by changing the start step on the second sampler, we travel from one style to another, and in this case, produce a gradient between Impressionism and photorealism. And this can be very helpful for dialing in the style and finding the sweet spot for your project. You'll notice here that even though we're on a fixed seed, once the prompt is expanded, if you look at the building, it's very different at the extreme ends of both styles. If you need to do this operation and produce a more structurally similar image, you can use a control net. There are many different types of control net models. In this case, I'm using a Canny, which adheres to the edges that are detected in an image. There are several preprocessor nodes that can take any image and produce a Canny edge version of it. We can then use that as input for the control net. And so here on the top row, I still have control net turned off, and you can basically see what we had before. Even though we're using the same fixed seed, the house starts to drift to a different house, and the composition changes the closer we get to the photographic style. But when I turn the control net on, the diffusion adheres to the structure of the initial image, and we can push the stylization much further if we want. There are many different control net models. You've probably heard of some of them. One of my favorites is the QR code monster model, also known as diffusion illusion. This is a very powerful and effective model for controlling the tone of an image. I use it all over the place to create strong shape language. One note is that these particular images were generated using SD 1.5. I still find that the SD 1.5 version of QR Code Monster ControlNet tends to outperform the SDXL version. Another ControlNet, this is the Depth Control LoRa in SDXL. This is just a viewport image directly out of Blender. This is a very simple scene. There's only two objects here, a flat plane to represent the ground and a Porsche 911 asset. Important to note, there's no need for a UV unwrap, no complex materials, no shader graph, no lighting, no setup, no fog, no render settings. This is just two simple meshes. The scene took less than 5 minutes to set up. I depth render that out of Blender and plug that into the control net, and guided by a simple prompt styled by SAI Cinematic, we get the expected output with reproducible results. And here, ControlNet can produce images that are consistently styled and with fine control over composition and minimal prompt guidance. If you don't like the exact position of the car, or you want a color change, or you need more negative space or for a masthead, for example, it's all achievable with this method. Here are some more examples. You'll notice that all of my 3D scenes here are very minimal, very low fidelity. These are very, very fast to set up. I don't need to add materials. I don't need to model all the fine details. I don't need to tweak with a renderer and Blender. I can keep things very quick and very dirty. Part of what I'm working towards here is creating a scaffolding to direct the diffusion and steer the AI towards a composition that I've designed beforehand and let Stable Diffusion do more of the heavy lifting. To me, ControlNet is really one of the secret sauces that elevates Stable Diffusion towards something that looks more like a production-grade artistic tool set. Another important technique I want to cover is regional prompting. If you've ever wanted multiple prompts and the ability to choose exactly where they appear in a single image, you can use what's called conditioning masks for this. So for example, here I have one prompt for the general environment assigned to the black region of the mask, and a second prompt for lavender fields assigned to the lower region in white. And then I set the mask and combine them using conditioning nodes. And here are the results of that operation. You can add as many masks as you want and use this technique to create very complex and very specific compositions. I don't know why this technique is not more popular or why there aren't more tools on the market that allow you to do this. Conditioning with masks is very powerful and very simple, and it's an excellent technique for controlling more precisely where you need specific elements in your images. Another thing that's great about this method is that there's also a strength value, which means you can dial in exactly how much of the additional prompt that you want added. So here on the left, I've got the strength set to 0, and then the lavender field is slowly dialed up with the strength between 0 and 1. And you can see that every step of the way it perfectly resolves the transition. Every one of these images is coherent. And again, this is just another great technique to help you achieve more precise control over your images at a high level. If you're interested, this is what a minimal network for that looks like. It's 2 prompts, 2 prompt stylers, 2 text encoders. At the very bottom, we're loading in the mask and plugging that into the network, then combining the prompts for input into the K-sampler. I notice you're taking pictures of this, which is great. Problem is, I don't think that the text is going to be easy to read. I actually just published a comprehensive white paper that dives deep into a number of different methods for regional prompting. I've also posted these workflows, and this is the link to that. But if you have any questions, please come and feel free to come see me for more details. A couple more methods. This is called an IP adapter network. If you're familiar with image prompting, this is similar, but it's much stronger and more flexible. What it does is it uses an additional vision model to look at an image, break it down, and patch your model with what it sees. So for example, let's say I have this image of this orange 911, and I want to include that image in my text prompt. I can use an IP adapter for that. And this is the kind of result that I get when I run that prediction. Strength is also on a slider with an IP adapter, so you can dial in the amount of influence from your source image. Here I have some sample generations between a strength of 0 and 1. At 0, it's using only the text prompt at the top, and then it's a gradient of values at the bottom, slowly adding the image in. You can take the strength above 1, but it starts to deep fry the image, so that's just something to keep in mind. On this particular seed, you can see that at 0.5, half strength, it lost track of the car. There's no car in the image, but it did find the palm tree, and it kept that from the source image. So you have to fine-tune the number to get the right amount of influence for whatever problem you're trying to solve. By default, both the text prompt and the IP adapter cover the entire image, but you can use a mask to apply the IP adapter to any region of the image. So for example, if we just wanted the image content to be positioned in a smaller region, say in the lower middle here, you can mask that in and cue the prompt, and we get a more concentrated result as expected. You can also add several IP adapters on top of each other, give them their own weights and their own masks. Here we have the text prompt again as the base that fills the entire image. We inject the IP adapter with the Porsche 911 into the red part of the image, the red channel, introduce a new jungle IP adapter and plug that into the green channel. And if we want to see what that looks like, here are the results of that, which is what you would expect. And of course, you can get more variations on that motif and cherry pick the ones that work best for you. You can also add control nets to get all these elements placed precisely where you want them. IP adapters are very powerful for prompting with images, especially in combination with attention masking. I just want to quickly cover a few upscaling techniques before I close out. This is another example of the high-res fix workflow from earlier, which works okay and it's very common. This is a zoom out, a zoom in of our low-res base image that I started with. And this is after the upscale operation using high-res fix. And you can see that it's changed the image quite a bit and hallucinated a bunch of new details And frankly, it's not an amazing image, in my opinion. To get results that are more true to the base image, we can lower the denoise factor or start at a higher step. But when we do that too much, it really starts to degrade the quality of the image, and there are much better methods for achieving high resolution than using high-res fix. There are actually dozens of upscaling methods. There's no one-size-fits-all upscaling solution. Sometimes you're trying to index towards creativity. Sometimes you need accuracy to your original image. Sometimes you need performance. The highlighted techniques can be added directly into your Comfy UI workflows, which means that they can be automated. The ones below the line here are standalone programs that do certain things really well. In the interest of time, I'm not going to deep dive all of these upscaling techniques. I've already covered high-res fix, and I will highlight 3 more here. First up is Focus, which I mentioned earlier, it has a decent and fast upscaler that you can also guide with a prompt. Back to the close-up of our base image, and through the Focus upscaler, it certainly has enhanced the image, but the beauty of Focus is that this is basically one click. It's fast, it's free, it's local, and it's very easy to use, especially if you're coming from Midjourney. The downside is that because this is a standalone tool, this is not easily automated. So if you have a large volume of images to work through, you're going to have to do them one at a time. The next method is Ultimate SD Upscale. This is in Comfy UI. This method breaks down your image into smaller tiles and then upscales each of those tiles individually and then stitches them all back together and then can blend the seams as well if you want. Depending on how you have it configured, you can see the configuration box has a lot of settings there. It can take quite a long time to generate, and it can also take quite a long time to learn and get this all dialed in. Here's the base image again. This is what it looks like, Ultimate SD Upscale, just straight out of the box. And then personally, I like to enhance the image a little bit more. So this is a result with an optimized config that's also using a ControlNet tile. You can see this is probably the best results that we've had so far. But finally, there's Magnific AI, which you may have heard of. This is a cloud service that runs in browser, highly optimized. I think it does an outstanding job, especially if you don't have all the time for experimentation. But it is a little bit pricey, and you need to be authorized to upload your image to another cloud service, and some clients don't want their IP being sent up. Back to our original image, and here it is enhanced and upscaled by Magnific with low creativity, and here it is with higher creativity where it's done, I think, a great job in enhancing the image and improving the aesthetic, but at the expense of a few unwanted details, which we can easily fix in post. Speaking of post, every image that I produce typically enters Lightroom near the end of my pipeline. In addition to fixing up all the flaws, the color in AI-generated images are often very oversaturated. The black levels are often too deep. The dynamic range is unrealistically high. And so I find I often have to make subtle tweaks to color. And if I see any obvious flaws, I'll clean them up with in-painting, do a little bit of Photoshop, sometimes add vignette, a little bit of film grain, but usually it's only about a 2 or 3% tweak. I really don't like to overwork this step, and that's about it. Again, back to our base image, and after upscaling and post-production. A couple more examples just to close out. This is before upscale and post. This is after upscale and post. Before and after. It's subtle, but it's crisp. This monitor, I'm not sure what it looks like over there, but this one doesn't look so hot. And that's it. Here's a summary of all the things I covered today that can help you gain more control over your image generations. I know I moved quickly, but hopefully you got some general ideas from this. I believe in this idea of a hybrid CGAI workflow. I think that's the real opportunity space right now. We should be leveraging our original human skills and augmenting them with the power of AI. I believe the decline of raster graphics has begun. We have to accept that many of us are and will be making images differently. I'm a proponent of Stable Diffusion and Comfy UI. I like that it's modular, open source. You can mix and match all the different methods here today and dial it into your precise spec and make custom complex workflows. It runs locally. It can be automated for high volume production. I believe AI is a tool in the right hands. It can be especially powerful. These are some things I'm looking at this year. If you have any interesting projects or need this kind of work, please do reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for taking this time with me. I can't wait to see what you come up with by applying these techniques on your own. And with that, I'm done. Thanks.